No, we have set time when we have agreed with everybody. It's 3 o'clock. And it is now 3 o'clock. No explanations. The meeting must start. Am I right, Chair?
100% correct.
Okay, Chair.
Agreed, Chair. Agreed.
Agreed. Yeah, because this meeting was actually in the request of the minister's office. So the office must be here.
Disagree.
Chair, I see, Chairperson, I see that the DG is now online. And while we are waiting, there was an apology, Chair, from Ms. Noluchungu from the EFF. She won't be attending today.
Okay. Well, Chair, let me hand over the reins to you.
Thank you.
To me.
Thank you, my co-chair. Honorable members, let me take this opportunity to formally open this meeting by extending a word of welcome to all of you, and a special word of welcome to the Minister. I can see he has joined us. Indeed, Honorable Chair, subsequent to the letter and correspondence from the Office of the Minister requesting the 2 committees for an audience, we subsequently then agreed to convene this meeting. In terms of the brief, the Minister requested an audience to update the committees around the convening the national taxi Indaba, which in terms of the thrust of the correspondence is centered around formalizing and also professionalizing the industry. That is the brief that we received from the Office of the Minister. And just to check, in terms of the apologies from the 2 committee secretaries, Hlupeka.
Thank you, Chairperson, and honorable members, colleagues. From the Select Committee, we don't have any apology at the moment.
Thanks, Hlupeka. Valerie?
Chair, from the NA side, the Portfolio Committee, it's Ms. Noluchungu from the EFF.
Thank you. Those are the apologies, honorable members. And without any waste of time, over to you, Honorable Minister. The floor is yours. Unmute yourself, Minister.
Yes, I have done that. Thank you, Chairperson of the and the Chair of the Portfolio Committee and honorable members for affording us this opportunity. I'm with the Director General, and I don't know whether the Deputy Minister is around, but I think if he is not around, I think it should be because of other commitments. I tabled before this joint the preparation for the taxi Indaba to deal with a very delicate yet important matter of our taxi industry. As I've said before we were disrupted by COVID-19, we're dealing with the matter of convening the national taxi Indaba to focus on the matter of regulation, formalization, as well as government subsidy for the taxi industry. We have now reignited that particular process back into action, and COVID-19 went further to unravel some of the difficulties we are facing that need to be resolved by working concurrently with the taxi industry and the South African government. And we are tabling the approach to the Indaba, which we will be launching on the 6th of August or a date later, depending on the state of preparedness and preparations. And also we will table the roadmap towards that Indaba in terms of the issues that we'll be dealing with. We want everybody, particularly the taxi industry and government in the provinces and local government, to be seized with this matter and input. The Indaba will resolve the biggest long outstanding matter of the taxi industry formalization. As you will know yourselves, that there have been a lot of criticism of government by the taxi industry in particular about the lack of subsidy for the industry, and ranging to the issues that affect us in relation to the regulations of COVID-19 and that relate to the taxi industry's public transport capacity to carry our people and their obligation in relation to that, and equally their financial situation, which have inadvertently affected our situation in relation to how we want to see the implementation of the regulations with regard to issues such as the carrying capacity and also government relief in this regard, and arguing like this quantum is too little and all of that. You all know that these are matters that we have reported we're considering because we think we can look at other mechanisms to disperse the resources, but as long as it will benefit the taxi industry without compromising the regulations and the laws of the country in terms of disbursement of such. So we are still in that hot discussion. We have just gone past the 100 quantum carrying capacity, which have come with itself all negatives like shutdown we have had to deal with and all of that. But in the main, with all that said and done, we know that the main question before us that need to be resolved is the formalization of the taxi industry. And all other issues will then follow, that is professionalization of the industry and all of that, depending on what formalization is able to produce. So we're looking forward to this engagement. We're dealing equally with a fragmented and an industry that is bedeviled by dispute and wars and over routes and all of that. So we seek to deal with those questions in this particular process. So, Chair, that will be my prelude, and I will invite my advisor, political advisor, Mr. Venkile, and the Director General, who will be sharing the presentation of this to the committee. And I wish to thank you in advance, for really affording us an opportunity to table this before the joins. Thank you very much, Chair. With your permission, I will invite the DG and the advisor to present to the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Minister. I will start with the first part of the presentation, and the DG will follow with the latter part. Valerie, are you able to put up the presentation on the screen?
Ms. Fakile will the screen sharing today, Chairperson, so she can go ahead to put it on the screen.
Okay. No. Thank you, Chairperson. I will start with the first part of the presentation. The outline of the presentation We'll start with a snapshot of the industry so that we can contextualize the issues that we'll be dealing with, and also the problem statement in relation to what the Indaba seeks to address, and then unpack the public discourse platform as well as the roadmap. Then the DG will get to the second part. If we can get to the third slide that says understanding the taxi industry, the broad thrust of what we're trying to do, Chairperson, is that we need to depart from an understanding that the minibus taxi industry is the largest mover of people in the country with 68% market share of all public transport modes, which therefore means that the majority of commuters utilize public transport. And the reality is that the taxi industry remains the one mode of transport that does not receive any form of subsidy from government, despite the fact that it has a larger share of the public transport market. But there have been interventions over the years in relation to assisting this industry, some of which also takes the form of a kind of a capital subsidy in terms of the recap. Over the medium term, there's about 188 million currently on the department's budget in relation to the tax recap. But also the department seeks to take a deeper look at the tax recap in terms of ensuring that this intervention indeed does benefit the industry. But also, while we're looking at this thing, the other slide, again, I'm not going to dwell much on it. It looks at the modal split in the country, with the train, with rail having 13% market share, bus 21%, and 66% the taxi industry. I think it was a mistake on the first slide. It's actually 66%, not 68%. What is it that we're trying to achieve? The reality is that we cannot pretend that the interventions relating to the taxi process started yesterday. We had to take a look in terms of where we come from with this process. Right from the very first administration in 1995, when the Minister of Transport then established the National Taxi Task Team, which was a process that involved civil society and public hearings right across the country, that culminated in the final recommendations that were presented in 1996 and accepted by government. Those final recommendations constituted the pact between the industry on the one hand, civil society and government, in terms of how this industry should be transformed. And the transformation of the industry came with three major thrusts out of the National Taxi Task Team process: the formalization process, regulation, and empowerment. However, 25 years on, we need to take stock in terms of how far have we come, because we would know that every intervention subsequent to the NTTT, ranging from what was contained in the white paper in public in transport on transport policy, what was contained in the transitional legislation, the National Land Transport Transition Act of 2000, has its genesis in the NTTT process and what government had committed to. To this day, we know that one of the big issues that remain a challenge is the issue of unity in the industry, because taxi violence continues to be the order of the day, and the nature of this violence has not really changed much from what it was prior to the NTTT in relation to turf wars, in relation to fight over routes, but also leadership contestations found themselves part of this recipe towards violence and conflict in the industry. One of the biggest issues there is the associations and the role associations play, and the extent to which we are able to regulate associations and hold them and their members accountable for their conduct. We know that through the Transition Act, there was a code of conduct that was enforceable. We need to have that conversation that what is it that, where have we gone wrong in relation to addressing this challenge and arresting the perverse incentives that give rise to conflict and violence in the industry. We know that from the NTTT, one of the major recommendations of the NTTT was that there must be a single industry representative body. that represents the interests of the industry right across the board. the evolution of Santaco and its establishment was as a result of that. Some of you may be aware, Chair, that before Santaco was established in 2001, the predecessor to Santaco was SATACO, the South African Taxi Council, which was the outcome of negotiations between government and all the mother bodies. At the time, the mother bodies were these national associations such as SAPTA, FELTA, SALPO. There were quite a number of them. And the agreement was then they had to fold to establish a single body that everybody would recognize. But subsequent to the establishment of SATACO in 1998, there was the emergence of the NTA. And there was a subsequent process that Minister Dala Omar spearheaded and delegated MEC Farisani in Limpopo at the time to lead the process that was meant to bring NTA into the fold with SATACO. And every province was involved in the process, and that culminated to the National Conference in Durban in 2001. In fact, SANTACO always reminds us that the NTA in SANTACO stands for NTA, because they were part of that conference. There is a report to that effect. They even contested the elections. But subsequent to that, when their leaders did not win any significant positions in the SANTACO elections, they walked away. However, it's not as cut and dried as that, the leadership issue, Chair, because there may be issues and nuances in relation to SANTACO's own behavior, to the extent that they get seen as an association. The intent was never to create an association in SANTACO. SANTACO is a council who is meant to be the voice of the industry right across the board. The NTTT recommendations were saying this leadership body must represent every subsector in the taxi industry. Whether you're talking meter taxi, you're talking midibus, any form of a taxi, it's supposed to be that. So that conversation, is SANTACO playing the role that was envisaged, one at the point that of recognition, two in terms of what was agreed to the NTTT. One other challenge is that the industry continues to operate as an informal sector on the fringes of the economy. What this means is that this formalization talks to two elements to it. One is that the business side of the industry is not structured along legally recognized business units, whether you're talking private companies or you're talking cooperatives, whatever the case may be. And as a result, does not contribute to the tax base in the form of corporate taxes, and does not comply with the labor laws to ensure that workers are protected. But on the other side of formalization is the issue of associations, whether they are able to operate within the parameters of a standard constitution as was envisaged in terms of the Transitional Act. The last part of the problem statement is that the regulatory framework that regulates the industry remains weak and ineffective. There are a number of reasons for that. One of those reasons is a fragmented approach to law enforcement. You have a situation where at a particular point in time, we had 10 pieces of legislation in the country that regulated public transport. With the promulgation of the NLTA, some of the provinces repealed those pieces of legislation and relied on the NLTA, but not every province took the same approach. An example is that the Western Cape amended the 1977 Act, the Road Transportation Act, and continues to utilize that amendment. What that does, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but what that does is that there is no uniformity in relation to how we address these issues. The consequence of that is that some provinces, for example, like Gauteng, continue to have dedicated public transport enforcement units in the old road transport inspectors. Some provinces continue to have those, some do not. They rely on the traffic law enforcement. But the other challenge is also the role of SAPS in enforcing public transport issues. So the regulatory issues, the enforcement issues, the leadership issues remain, and empowerment and empowering the industry, such that interventions like the taxi recap truly benefit the industry continue to be a challenge. And the idea is that the National Taxi Indaba must not be another talk shop, but rather be a platform where an action plan, an implementable action plan that will make sure that all the things that we've been putting in place over the years, we're able to find sustainable interventions, but also we must bring them to fruition. We must not have another 5 years of conversation. That is the minister's intent with the Indaba, that the battle of ideas in relation to the models, whether we're talking empowerment or leadership, must be won on the public discourse platform and the provincial Indaba rather than the national Indaba. The national Indaba must be a place where we consolidate the consensus that we've been able to achieve. Then the next slide on the public discourse platform, Chair, I think the key issue is that one of the major drivers toward build up initiatives towards the Indaba is the launch of a public discourse platform that the minister spoke to. The public discourse platform is intended. There is a process of putting together the different perspectives in relation to each of the areas that the Indaba must address, and therefore, once the content is in place, which we're at an advanced stage, also working with Santaco, is that we need them to be able to open up and invite civil society and every major stakeholder to be part of the conversation. So this is a conversation that the minister is initiating with industry, with key stakeholders, with civil society, because all these parties have a stake and an interest in the industry. The major objectives of the public discourse platform is firstly to engage in conversation with these stakeholders and civil society on the future of the taxi industry. As we have alluded, that it has a 66% market share of the public transport operations. The second objective is to sharpen perspectives in conversation with everybody in the space, including opinion makers, on what are the best practices that we need to adopt and follow as we formalize, as we regulate, and as we empower the industry. The third objective is to build and sustain the momentum of public discourse on topical issues, because some of these conversations do not find expression on the main platform. One of those is the issues around, for example, gender-based violence in the taxi industry. That conversation is muted, and the minister has been quite emphatic that these conversations must not have holy cows. So all the issues, society must be able to raise its voice, so that the outcome of the taxi Indaba is not just a product of a conversation between the taxi industry and government, but also to follow in the same spirit of the NTTT, that the voice of civil society must not be lost in that conversation. The launch itself is just a means to an end. The launch, and the minister wants the launch to initiate, to trigger that conversation. It's going to take place over time, between the time that we launch the public discourse platform and the time the provincial Indaba and the national Indaba happens. We need to be able to sustain that conversation. So the launch itself will be in the form of an event, a virtual town hall panel discussion with a number of stakeholders. But we need to be able to reach out to everybody in the country in the form of community radio station. Radio remains the largest platform if we want to reach the masses of our people. There's a conversation, there's a discussion with SABC in order that even the launch itself, if we could find a mechanism to simulcast that launch and that conversation right across all the African radio station platforms, including community radio stations through a GIS facility. But as I've indicated, that the minister will be the face of the public platform Discom and the main spokesperson, as well as the MECs in the provinces. But part of the conversation and the spokespersons is that experts and other people will come on board to speak on different aspects and different themes that are going to emerge out of the discussion documents that will be launched as part of this platform. So the platform is not just launching a conversation in a vacuum. It will be the release of the draft discussion documents, which will then guide and shape the conversation. And the options and experiences over the last 25 years will be part of that conversation. This is how far we've come. We've looked at integrated public transport networks, and this is how we see the role of the taxi industry. The industry will also share its own experiences, and it becomes a melting pot where all those views and ideas will then shape and inform what becomes the discussion in the provincial Indaba and the national Indaba. The next slide on the content of the public discourse, as I indicated, Chair, that the public discourse is not happening in a vacuum. So there are a number of discussion documents that the work streams are hard at work putting together to address a number of critical and topical issues that will be released that the minister will release when he's launching the public discourse platform. The first one deals with formalization. As I've indicated earlier, that formalization is a two-sided coin. The one side of the coin deals with the business side of the industry. Is that how do we formalize the business activities into corporate entities? What are the models that are there? We know that in the country there have been a lot of experiences over the years and different associations. Some of the associations have converted their businesses into private companies. I know an example of a Greater Albertine Taxi Association that has established itself into a private company. You have cooperatives. A number of provinces over the years have worked with the industry to roll out the model of cooperatives. We've also seen these different models in the BRT processes. But we need to look at best practices and need to look at what is the best model that is going to be beneficial to the industry. But one of the key drivers of determining what that benefit is, the minister has been quite emphatic that the empowerment model of the industry must be one that benefits every single operator, right up to that last operator who owns that one taxi that goes twice a week to the rank in a rural place like Mkanduli. It must not be a model that's going to end up only enriching the leadership and those who find themselves sitting on the boards of these entities when the operators on the ground do not benefit. Formalization also talks to the issue of compliance with the country's tax and labor laws. We do know that over the years, the successive ministers of labor have made sectoral determinations in relation to the taxi industry, as well as the minimum wage for drivers. But none of these have been implemented and enforced. Now, this is one of the issues that are quite urgent, because it's one of the issues that have come up quite sharply in relation even to the support package in relation to COVID, because the numbers wouldn't have escalated to what they are if the industry was contributing to the UIF, because the workers would have been covered by the UIF support. But again, the issues about leadership processes and associations, where did we go wrong in addressing this matter? In terms of the Transitional Act, we had started the process where it was mandatory for every association to align their constitutions to the standard constitution and subscribe to a code of conduct, which was enforceable by the taxi registrar. But in the institutional rearrangement, when we move from the transition to the final land transport legislation, we changed the institutional landscape. We need to ask the hard question and be honest with ourselves if there are areas where we add, because the importance of the code of conduct was that it became a very important tool to hold association and any other operator accountable to a particular level of conduct. And the registrars at the time, the taxi registrars, were quite effective as custodians of the code of conduct. But then part of what we need to look at is that how do we make sure, because associations, once your members are found guilty or to have violated the code of conduct, the association could be deregistered in terms of what we had in the transitional dispensation, and therefore lose any kind of government sponsored benefit. And perhaps the time is ripe, even if even if this is not a responsibility that lies with government and its institutions, even if it's a responsibility that we say, as we conceptualize what kind of council that we want to establish in the form of a reimagined Santaco, if we're saying that it needs to be a council that must be the custodian of that code of conduct, that's a conversation we need to have. One of the key issues that have come up in the contestation between Santaco and the NTA has been that there is no legal prescripts that gives Santaco the legal authority as an industry representative structure. And part of the conversation is that perhaps because we have to ask the hard questions. One of the questions that we have to answer is that, is it desirable to create a statutory entity, to make Santaco a statutory entity? And the answer was no, because you then water down the benefit of an industry and own an industry representative body. However, one of the options that are on the table, which will be part of this discussion, is that perhaps one of the solutions would be in the enabling legislation, we could introduce an empowering provision where the minister is empowered to recognize a single industry representative body to give effect to that provision. And remember that the issue of a single industry representative body comes from one of the reasons that the NTTT made that determination was the experience of the mother bodies that were actually at the center of driving taxi violence. Because these mother bodies had national membership, if at any particular time there is a conflict between SAPTA and SALTA, now all local associations that are affiliated on the other side would be at war, which was one of the biggest problems. So we had quite a number of mother bodies, and the industry itself recognized that when you have too many voices that claim to represent the industry, the economic interests that invariably give rise to conflict will always prevail, because then it becomes about who's affiliated to whom. Now that's the key. Those are the key issues in relation to what the discussion documents relating to formalization and what the conversation would be. So the messaging of the public discourse platform going forward between the time the minister launches and the time we get to the Indaba will be nuanced to be able to tackle these issues. The second paper deals with regulation. Regulation is one of the most critical elements in relation to the transformation of the industry, because it deals with the bread and butter issues, primarily because your operating license determines your ability to operate in the industry and be able to make money. We know that the history of operating licenses, there's a long evolution from permits in terms of the 1977 Act and the 1977 Road Transportation Act, were at the time indefinite and were therefore classified as property because they were transferable. If the holder of a permit passes away, that becomes part of the estate. But what was recognized at the time of the NTTT was that the perverse incentive that it created was undermining transport planning. Because if you are unable to issue operating licenses driven by demand and supply dynamics, you are therefore creating a recipe for violence, because it was one of the issues that were identified as such. And therefore, agreement was saying we need to move away from indefinite permits. There must be a review. An operating license must have a finite lifespan, which can be renewed. And that renewal also cannot be automatic, because it must be guided by the transport plans that are in place. However, there are a number of other issues in relation to operating licensing that are pressing, and some of which need to be addressed even before we get to the Indaba. Some of these issues are what I would refer to as own goals, are challenges that government itself has created in terms of, you find there's a challenge of backlogs in a number of provinces on issuing operating licenses. Again, this is one of the issues that came up quite sharply in the discussions about the relief package for the COVID, precisely because you have quite a number of operators who have applied for operating licenses, despite the fact that the law has prescribes a time frame with which operating license application must be processed. That has not been happening over the years. And therefore, you have quite a lot of thousands of operators who have receipts. That receipt we're talking about is a receipt that's all it does. It proves that you had applied for an operating license. It doesn't mean that it will be granted. But now you've reached a point where what do you do with those? Because it's no fault of the operators that the operating licenses have not been processed. So that's one of the issues that we need to deal with. And part of that is that we're also looking at how do we fast track this issue, because the provincial regulatory entities, it remains a burden to them. But there are a number of other challenges with operating licenses. The inverse part of it is also you've got quite a large number of operators that are illegal, that do not have operating licenses, that have not even attempted to apply for operating licenses, who are swelling the numbers in relation to the actual operations on the ground. There have been a number of proposals from provinces that have come up, including a proposal for the minister to consider a moratorium while we clean up the issues. But one of the challenges in relation to operating licenses is the role of the local sphere of government, the role of municipalities. In terms of the law, any application for an operating license must be referred to the municipality that will be impacted on by that operating license or operation. More often than not, municipalities simply do not respond to those requests from the provincial regulatory entities, resulting in a situation where permit or operating licenses get issued without the benefit of whether they are in line with the transport plans and will not result in saturation and oversupply. The other element of this conversation on regulation are the institutional arrangements. The institutional arrangements in terms of the NLTA is that we have provincial regulatory entities that have been established to issue operating licenses and manage relevant processes. The big conversation about the PREs is whether the model that we have, whether do provinces have the requisite capacity to be able to undertake this work. We need to get to underneath the surface in understanding that things like backlogs and conflicts, because we'd collapse the role of the registrar into the provincial regulatory entities. Are these entities sufficiently capacitated to undertake this work such that not only are they the custodians of who may or may not operate, but they are also able to adjudicate on some of the critical issues that emerge as a consequence of that? The second element is that the legislation talks to the establishment of municipal regulatory entities. What is the strategy in relation to devolution of the function to the MREs? Because the minister has not devolved this function to any of the municipalities. What kind of capacity do we require to have in place? Part of the task team chair includes SALGA. SALGA is part of the task team, and they're quite active in terms of the inputs into this process. So the conversations as they go along carries the input and the conversations with SALGA to say, what is it that we need to do to be able to shift the burden from the provincial regulatory entities to the municipal regulatory entities? One of the most important institutions created by the NLTA is the National Public Transport Regulator. Over the years, the National Public Transport Regulator, its functioning has been limited to tourist services. However, in terms of the legislation, this institution has an extremely important role as a custodian, as an institution that must monitor and oversee public transport operations right across the country, not limited to the taxi industry, right across the modes. And one of the important functions is also to adjudicate on issues relating to fares in the industry. The minister has now operationalized, given the National Public Transport Regulator, its full mandate, and the new regulator that has been appointed from the 1st of August will hit the ground running in terms of ensuring that not only is this regulator able to exercise its full mandate, But part of the important element of its work is to provide leadership, support, and standardize operations right across provinces in terms of provincial regulatory entities and municipalities. That has been the missing link in relation to empowering and setting down the rules in relation to the issuing of operating licenses and the capacity of municipalities. So the National Public Transport Regulator is going to play a huge role in creating that balance. I must mention that one of the important elements in the mandate of the National Public Transport Regulator, the law and the NLTA enables it to intervene where a provincial regulatory entity is not able to process applications for operating licenses within the mandatory time frame. So this becomes a backstopper in relation to addressing the issue of the backlog, that the NPTR must have the capacity to be able to step in and assist where the province requires support to get rid of the backlogs. The other important element of the regulation conversation is law enforcement. As I've alluded earlier, that this is one of the sticky issues, because without enforcement, your regulatory system becomes weak. Now, one of the important elements is that the work that the RTMC has been doing in terms of its code of conduct, they've raised the issue of a dedicated public transport enforcement, because the key issue there is that we need to be able to have sufficient capacity that is sustainable for enforcing public transport across the country. But what weakens it is that at times the support from the SAPS is extremely weak, depending what part of the country you're at, because SAPs tend to see public transport enforcement as issues around permits and therefore tends to shy away from those. But also the different configuration of provincial departments has proven to be a challenge, because in some provinces you have the traffic function not even within the Department of Transport, but sitting with a different department. And an example of that would be Gauteng, where traffic is sitting with community safety and not transport. Because what that does, it creates a disjuncture between the overall transport objectives and what we want to achieve as transport, and the role of enforcement as an instrument towards achieving those. The other element relates to empowerment. Now, this is part of the biggest debate and the most exciting that will come out of the discourse. The minister has given the task team a very clear brief to say, we need to reimagine the tax recap. We need to understand, we need to go back to say, why in the first place did government initiate the tax recapitalization program? We know that at the heart of the tax recap was to address a recapitalization crisis that the industry found itself in. What that crisis is, you're dealing with an industry that is hand to mouth, where that one operator in Mkanduli who goes to the rank twice a week, every cent that he makes from the daily takings, that money goes to buy groceries at home, goes to pay school fees and buy uniform for the kids. And therefore, by the time, and is left with nothing to invest back into the business such that he's able to recapitalize itself. And this gives rise to perverse incentives. One of those perverse incentives is an industry, when they need parts, they end up resorting to chop shops and perpetuating, other illegal kind of activities, precisely because of the economics of the industry. And part of the conversation was that the tax recap needs to find mechanisms that would enable the industry to access additional layers of revenue, while at the same time it participates in the mainstream economy. We know that government to date has spent in excess of 4 billion with the tax recap, with more billions to be spent over the next 5 years. Now, one of the big questions that the minister has been asking, that as a country, as an industry, we need, and as government, we need to answer. These billions that government is pumping into the taxi industry through the tax recap, who is the real beneficiary? Is the industry the real beneficiary of these billions? Because if government says for every taxi that we scrap, you get paid 124,000. If over the next 5 years we're going to be scrapping 75,000 taxis, you're talking in excess of 9 billion, the kind of money that will exchange hands over that period. But the question remains, what can a single operator do with 124,000? If that operator still wants to be in the industry, the best that they can do is to go and put down a deposit for a new taxi that costs him 600, 700,000, which puts him back in the vicious debt cycle and spend a number of years trying to pay off a debt with premiums that are extremely high. Is there no mechanism that we can find a way to make sure that every cent that government puts towards the industry in the form of tax recap truly benefits the industry? Why is it that we can't establish a cooperative bank that will then take that money and assist the industry in terms of acquiring vehicle while lowering the cost of borrowing, firstly, but also at the same time lowering the premiums over the time, because this cooperative may be owned by the industry, but it doesn't have to be a cooperative. It could also be a private entity. We're looking at various models. One of the models is what the Western Cape has been doing with the red dot and the blue dot. But also there are other models in terms of what the industry itself has been initiating. We do know that Santaco has a business arm in the form of a company called Taxi Choice. What is Taxi Choice doing? How is that benefiting the industry? But what must drive whatever intervention that we arrive at, it must be the minister's commitment to that any empowerment model in whatever shape or form must benefit the operators right up to that person who owns a single taxi. The creation of a value chain. I'm almost done, Chairperson. Again, the link to this is the introduction of a subsidy system that includes the participation of the industry. But the last element in terms of the conversation relates to professionalization. Part of the professionalization deals with issues such as your gender-based violence, such as your customer care, such as training, and a number of those issues that will then enable the industry to conduct itself in a manner that is professional. The roadmap towards the tax Indaba consists of 6 stages. The first one is the agenda setting meetings, which the minister has held a number of these agenda setting meetings, and more importantly, that has had a conversation with MINMEC. Has had a meeting with Santaco, the metered taxis, the e-hailing providers, and unfortunately, the setting in of COVID did not create an opportunity for the agenda setting meeting with the NTA, which will still happen. The second stage is the packaging of the discussion document, which at the heart of it, which at the heart is the 25-year diagnostic report. That's a high-level summary in terms of how far we've come. The third stage is the launch of the public discourse platform, which we've spoken to. The fourth stage being the stakeholder engagements, which will continue post the launch. The provincial is Indaba, and ultimately the national tax Indaba. I think at this stage the DG will take the next part of the presentation. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I will now proceed with the second part of the presentation, which looks to our vision beyond the Indaba and what the Minister seeks the Indaba to achieve. And this is just a a glimpse into the future of where we are taking this thing. And with all what Mr. Venkile has said and once addressed, this is where this will put us at, and some of the key critical factors that are interdependencies, which are not going to be discussed at the Indaba, but which are quite obvious that they need to be attended to side by side with the matters being ventilated at the Indaba to bring us to the future which we require. So as an important thing is that we are looking at a subsidization formula, and we're looking at subsidizing including taxis, all of public transport. And we think that in order for us to achieve this, Mr. Venkile has indicated a modal share of which modes carries which passengers. And then it is quite an anomaly that a mode that carries majority of passengers in the country is not supported. And in fact, in the last 25 years, little change has happened in the framework within which we support public transport and we fund it. And we still see a heavy emphasis on funds such as the public transport operators grant. But in there, on the operators, we look only at buses and we do not look at taxi operators, which are also public transport. And we believe as a point of departure and as a principle that each mode has a place to play and it must play its role and stick in its lane. So all of the public transport modes, including meter taxis and others, need to also be supported to ensure that they play their role in terms of the last mile and all of the positioning that we see in that regard. In order for us to achieve this within the current expenditure ceiling, we have to draw together all existing funding for public transport, look at it, put it into one pot and pull all the resources together. And that will feed us after consolidation into a general public transport fund, which public transport fund must actually then look on a prorated redistribution according to the modal share in this regard. And I think that that is the formula we would seek to utilize going forward. There would be parallel to the processes of the Indaba, and also that we have already begun discussions with the Treasury, and we're having roundtables around this matter of discussions around the consolidation of all of this, and we have to also consult. We will come back on this separate process, both to the two committees of Parliament and to consult Parliament, but we'll also consult with SALGA and also with the MINMEC of the Minister to ensure that we bring all stakeholders on board about the key consolidation. The future for us lies in integrated public transport network provision. And in that regard, we still see the issue of rail becoming a primary and a true backbone of public transport, and with buses and taxis playing a feeder role. Each mode playing its own role, and on medium distances, buses need to carry much more of a heavier load, and on non-serviceable routes that buses become unsustainable and unviable. Taxis needs to play that road, and smaller vehicles like meter taxis should do the last mile. And each mode is designated based on its abilities and what it needs to do, and we will seek to utilize subsidization as a way of discouraging other modes playing in other spaces where they are not supposed to. Same goes for for minibus taxis. Right now, they are oversaturated. One of the things Mr. Venkile pointed out is the reality that we are facing a saturation in the industry, and we're reviewing even the number of licenses and all of that. In order to ease this burden, we will seek to use the carrot of a subsidization to encourage modal splits where it's necessary, and to encourage the type of mode that is encouraged to service specific areas. So the intermodal facilities are a way and a future of how we go about and where you can find all of these things all together. Right now, we only see this in bigger cities, but we see a huge disintegration in this regard. And we think that we can ensure seamlessness of commuter movement by ensuring that there are sufficient intermodal facilities where passenger transfers can happen quite easier. And South Africa, but particularly the democratic government, has not invested significantly in intermodal facilities, and we have built on the existing facilities of the apartheid government. But we need to go beyond that and bring, particularly in larger areas such as take in Gauteng and an area such as Baragwanath. There we have to look at a greater intermodality and a new facility, and we need land reclamation as well as land capture in this regard to achieve what we are looking at. We're also looking at utilizing other instruments, including single public transport ticketing. That should become a norm to ensure seamless integration of public transport provision in our country. If you look at that schematic way, it still present what we are looking at, the present challenges and what integration would mean for us going to the future, and integrating this with other technologies, including integrated ticketing. And to that regard, we think we'll be much more responsive in provision of a seamless service, with the rail, obviously, as I've indicated, serving as a backbone for this. If we look at modal integration as well, we are looking at an EMV system in as far as the smart base card is available. We have I've reported previously to the committee in the portfolio committee in the National Assembly that we have asked SANRAL to start work around this part and to utilize some of their existing infrastructure and capabilities to do exactly this. They have begun work, and they are consulting with other public entities in as far as this is concerned. Our issue is an operator account that will be linked to operating license, as well as a business account to which monies could be paid based on what the system does. But the integrated ticketing solution will provide a seamless way. With one ticket, you can actually use for taxi, for bus, for train, for a plane, for every other thing, as long as it's public transport provision, including on BRTs. Again, we have looked at it in that different schematic way, but the single public transport mobility account, and to convert the existing e-toll infrastructure, including all of this into as a platform on which we can draw on this. We think that SANRAL is better placed already with what it has to be able to provide the system with ease and to provide intermodality from that point of view. We are also looking at public transport priority lanes instead of BRTs, particularly for middle-sized cities, as we have learned lessons about the challenges this is bringing to the fore. And we think that this is justifiable, is cheaper. In fact, we have examples of this where this is already happening. In Tshwane, if you look at the Steve Biko street, you see a seamless lane that links the north together with the CBD. And in the mornings and at peak in the afternoon, cones are put up and buses go up and down in both directions on that lane. And when the peak period reduces, the cones are removed and the lane gets reopened back to normal traffic. Same thing in Cape Town. There is a time, prescribed time operating as a public transport priority lane, wherein between 5 o'clock in the morning and 9, you are not allowed on a lane from the airport, the inner lane from the airport to the CBD. Only public transport can move there, and beyond 9 o'clock, ordinary vehicles and traffic can then move in. The same concept, we are looking at applying it because we have seen particularly the cost of implementation of BRT operation, as well as building up the lanes as we have been doing it, that is not sustainable, is quite expensive, particularly even for the maintenance by the medium-sized cities at this point. So PTPs are more preferred than the BRTs in other areas. And there, in a schematic manner, we have looked at the role and positioning in terms of typologies for defined interventions, and you can see exactly where the minibus taxi is supposed to operate in low density farming communities, small minor towns, and all of that, but also in main metros, a basic developmental potential of it to happen in those areas. And you also see that in those areas we are looking at where there is limited services, and there's also scheduled daily services going into the future. So that is balanced out against the midi buses, the BRTs in major cities, and also in the medium-sized cities, the PTPs being unfolded. So in as far as necessary interventions are concerned, in towns, in high-density rural and semi-rural areas, as well as sparsely located rural areas, we will seek to utilize the machinery and the instrument of subsidization to encourage full service rollout in these areas, including vehicle recapitalization will be utilized as an instrument for suggesting services in high density rural areas. And this is intended to really address the non-serviced areas and to encourage services to go to where now there is no service, and public transport provision in South Africa in the rural areas is quite erratic. And 26 years later, we can't continue like this. We have to accept that we need an incentive and a carrot to encourage service to be provided where there is clearly market failure to enter those areas. The state needs to intervene. In as far as other considerations we're having, the future as well as other disruptive technologies, the bulk of what we are raising and in terms of the consolidation of those funds, as you may recall, is reliant really on the use of the fuel levy to fund some of the subsidization. This is becoming a challenge. More and more electric cars are becoming a reality, and autonomous self-driving vehicles are coming as well. And we were caught grossly ill-prepared in as far as the e-hailing issues, and we are now preparing ourselves for this. We need to diversify the income gap, and part of our roundtables with the Treasury is looking at the future, and the same applies also for the road accident fund, which is purely reliant on the fuel levy. And as the cost of batteries and as the cost of photovoltaic batteries are going down in electric cars, the cars are becoming more cheaper, they are becoming more stable as infrastructure for charging of these cars is being rolled out, and as the technology around charging becomes fast chargers, the cars are looking quite attractive. In fact, our minister last year during October Transport Month released the first vehicles that were to make a round trip around the country and to reach Cape Town, and he was also on hand in Cape Town to receive those vehicles, showing now that these are no longer just weekend cars that you can drive over the weekend, but the range is improving, and these cars can reach further. So these are new things we need to consider, and as we are looking at subsidization as a future of encouraging public transport provision, we've got to balance out with those considerations. There are also flying taxis that are becoming a reality. A few cities have already begun licensing these flying taxis, and as you may know, at the Dubai Motor Show last year, they had released the one you see up there in the middle, and it's now there. And you can also know that New York is running a pilot around this, and Singapore has issued a first license for flying taxis to start working. And we also are beginning to come into contact with flying cars and the use of them as taxis. And this now brings a new dimension. Our legal edifice have been broken down, whether it's civil aviation or land transport, and this breaches both two worlds. And it does mean that in context of our laws, they are designated fields and all of those things. You can't just take off anywhere and so forth. So, but these are realities, and these cars will soon make their way to South Africa, and we need to be ready and prepared for those eventualities, including the nature of the licenses and who regulates and all of that. So these are all the considerations that have got to be handled parallel as the Indaba grinds and as what is happening with the future for us to consider all of that. And I think that brings to the end our insights about what other additional considerations are we working on parallel to the processes of the Indaba that will have an impact on the industry going forward. Thank you, Chair.
For taking us through the last leg of the presentation, which was started by the minister and then the advisor, in terms of the content of the presentation. Honorable members, that's the presentation. Anything, Chair? Co-Chair? Can you unmute yourself? You are on mute.
Saying the chair is still chairing well. Let's hear
you.
what other members are saying. I'm listening very well. I'm following. Thank you.
Thank you, my co-chair. Honorable members, let's then engage with the presentation. We will start with Honorable Manu. Honorable members, what I will do, I have the list of honorable members. All of you will have an opportunity to engage with the presentation. Honorable Manu, the floor is yours.
I'm covered, Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Honorable Manu. Let's go to Honorable Yabo here. Honorable Ramadwa. Honorable Khai.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Let me welcome also the input and the opening remarks by Honorable Minister, the advisor to the Minister, as well as the DG. Chair, there's nothing much to say other than to welcome the progress that is being made by the ministry and the department with regard to the taxi industry or the public transport as a whole. We will really welcome the progress, but also agree with the minister that perhaps there have been the COVID-19 did cause some delays in terms of meeting the objectives, particularly around the issue of public transport and the taxi industry in particular. So, Chair, what I would like perhaps to say would be, it would be good if from the side of government, those areas that need to be tied up, I think it would be good if the department could fast track that. Around the issue of regulation, Mr. Vengile was talking about challenges around law enforcement, the fragmentation in terms of the authorities that are responsible for law enforcement. I'm saying that if government can tie up around, even if it means enacting a new act to address such issues so that there are no challenges around those matters. So there are a couple of issues, therefore, that I think government should take responsibility of and try and fix them. The DG has talked to the issue of subsidy. We are impressed that there are discussions between the department and the treasury around that particular issue. Some of the issues, I think it would be better if government has proposals. I hear Mr. Vengile say talking about the discussion document. I hope that those documents will also be shared with the two committees of Parliament, so that perhaps they could also input with regard to those. But there are issues that I'm not quite sure whether the taxi industry on its own would have a capacity to initiate some of these things. For example, the issue of capitalization that will then benefit the taxi industry itself. Perhaps, I don't know whether government or the department cannot also take initiative to ensure that that is happening, that the industry, the taxi industry itself, benefits out of that instead of the commercial banks. The issue of cooperative banks, I'm not sure whether the taxi industry on its own has the capacity to initiate a cooperative bank, or it will need, therefore, the assistance of government with regard to that. So those are the issues. But also on recapitalization, I just wanted to ask a question whether is the issue of recapitalization a permanent feature, or has it got a limit? Because you're talking about billions that are put into that particular program. So what I wanted to check whether it is a permanent feature. Whilst I also support that that government should also be involved to make sure that the taxi industry itself benefits. As well as other laws, Mr. Vengile talk about the labor laws, particularly sectoral determination, that must be seen to be observed and implemented, and therefore there should be inspectors of the Department of Employment and Labor that ensure the implementation of the sectoral determination. I'm not sure, Chair, with regard to the issue of because we're saying that as the industry will be formalized, we'll be also expecting that they should be paying tax. I'm not sure what is the attitude of the department or government with regard to tax. Would there be a special dispensation, given that you're talking about the industry that was not being taxed? Will there be a special dispensation that will bringing them gradually to the tax regime, so that perhaps they are not taxed the same way that in other industries, formal industries are being taxed? So I just wanted to hear what the view of government is with regard to that. As I was indicating, Chair, without wasting time, that there are a lot of things that I think government itself, beside what will come out of the Indaba, taxi Indaba, but there are issues that the government itself must also fast track. One of them is the issue of the operating licenses. Yeah, thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Hansinger.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Allow me to just offer our sympathy and condolences from the earlier discussion. I gathered that Honorable Danjo lost a dear brother, and that most certainly is a big loss, and from our side, just condolences and sympathy. With regards to the presentation, thank you very much for the presentation, Mr. Lawrence Fikile, and also DG Mumi. Minister, from the DA side, first impressions, we absolutely welcome this initiative. We certainly also feel that the objectives are addressing core matters that really needs to be addressed. And we certainly hope that this would lead to improved relationship over a wide scope. An improved relationship in terms of the shared partnership of different modes of transport, but also an improved relationship in terms of everybody that shares a road. So just in giving impression from our side on what was presented here today, we certainly find the methodology very acceptable, but then also the different stages of processing towards a inclusive dialogue, and we will most certainly then be a keen participator in this whole process. Some concerns that we have at this stage would be consideration to then in parallel also look at elements that have been neglected in the development of the NLTA, and which still needs to be defined in this Indaba, and I'm specifically referring to the Avante taxi vehicle phenomenon, if I might call it that way, which seems to be ignored. Yet if you operate and if you look into, in townships, the Avante vehicles are increasing on a near daily scale, and it most certainly cannot be ignored. And to me, it was a sad occasion where it was left out in the NLTA development, where I believe that one should acknowledge them as a particular sector, but also engage on this very early stage around their existence and how they would play a part in this whole idea, which Mr. Mumi adequately expressed in his idea of feeder routes and trunk routes. So somewhere, somehow, this must be described. Other elements that are not adequately described in this framework would be the different roles, because yes, a huge number of employment in terms of taxi drivers, but then there are also subsections thereof which have developed into specialized categories, and I'm referring to taxi rank marshals, taxi rank managers in bigger taxi rank operations, and then also, the taxi gachis. So how each of these would be accommodated or formalized in further aspects of segmentation in the different roles to then give proper structure to the idea of formalization and professionalization. I would also like to know at this early stage whether any consideration has been given in the particular future shareholding between the different modes of transport, because I think it's also important, although this Indaba is everything about taxis. At this Indaba, it should also be made very clear and should very be stressed that the other main modes of public transport, bus and train, definitely need to fit into the future model of integrated transport. And therefore, I'm cautious to have a view of either the one or the other, because choice and options to a large extent determine what you can afford and what you can't afford. So therefore, I'm more inclined to favor a position of a defined percentage partnership in terms of the integrated transport model, rather than to predetermine that a particular route would only be for one mode of transport and not the other. Certainly, I would also encourage consideration for the Department of Labour, but then also the judiciary, to then at least react to the fact that we've seen so many taxi murders. But I cannot recall, and my focus is mainly on the Western Cape because I live here and I have most of my relationships within the industry established in the Western Cape. I cannot recall one taxi murder conviction in the Western Cape. So therefore, I would really ask Minister for serious consideration for the judiciary, then also to be included in some or other way to just give expression as to the importance of this public transport sector, and that we really need their involvement together with specialized police investigation. That would be all from my side. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Singer. Honorable MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to just make a couple of comments. From the ANC, we welcome the presentation and the efforts made to formalize the taxi industry. It's one of the most, used industries in South Africa. It's the most black-owned industry, and it's the least regulated industry in South Africa. And I welcome all the efforts that the Minister, the DG, and Lawrence Fikile has done to ensure that we get to a point where we can get everybody around the table to discuss the formalization. And I applaud them for their efforts. I do, however, think this is the ideal opportunity to add these illegal conversions of the panel vans into the mix, and that efforts made that we can get these vehicles off the road as soon as possible, because those are death traps and it's killing our people. The ordinary black person needs the taxis to get to work. They don't need to be killed in the mode of transport to get to work. And then on a side note, Chair, I will also like to, there's a couple of black entrepreneurs that have sent me a letter and they would like to present to us in the Portfolio Committee and the Select Committee. They're busy developing a battery vehicle, battery taxi, and they're finding it very difficult to get through all the hoops that government has put in place. And I think we should, as a Portfolio Committee and a Select Committee, really honestly get them in to explain to us what their problems and hurdles is that they have to jump, and so that we can assist them from the Portfolio Committee and the Select Committee on opening the doors for them to get these battery-operated taxis on the road. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable MacDonald. Is Honourable Knowledge Chungu present?
Thank you, Chairperson. It's Honourable Nazir Paulson. I'm standing in for Honourable Noluchungu.
Okay, Honourable.
Thank you very much to the presenters and to the Minister. Chairperson, it was correctly stated that currently the backbone of our transport industry seems to be the taxi industry, and it's expensive for commuters. I'd like to know, what is the plan? The Minister or the presentation does speak to fixing the rail network so that it becomes it plays its rightful role within the transport network. And what is the plan to improve or to fix the rail network, especially a line like the Central Line in Cape Town that transports up to 400,000 people, or used to transport, but it is no longer operating? What are the plans to fix the rail network, and what is the plans to fix the Central Line in Cape Town? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Let me get my camera right here. Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity. Chair, I just want to speak to three issues. The first is the rule of law. Chair, I recently saw a very funny cartoon that depicted the rule of law in South Africa, and it started with the magistrates' courts, and then it went on to the high courts, and then it went on to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and then it went on to the Constitutional Court, and then it went on to the taxi industry. And I think that summarizes, Chair, where we are in terms of the rule of law in South Africa. And we've seen various indiscretions, especially here in KZN, I'm sure around the whole country. But in KZN, for instance, we had a situation where the city started tightening up on taxi operations, and the taxi associations hijacked an executive committee meeting of the city, where they actually held the entire executive committee of the city of eThekwini hostage in a room, and nothing happened to them. The Go Durban projects, which I'm sure the Minister is aware of, have been delayed on a number of occasions by taxi associations that have gone on site to workers working on those sites, and have threatened them with their lives if they don't stop working and delay the actions. And once again, nothing has happened to them. So Honourable Hunsinger referred to it, but perhaps the Minister needs to really think about talking to the police about a special transport investigations task team, and also perhaps to the Minister of Justice about a special court set up for transport issues for a period of time to try and settle these matters down, so that we can get some sort of hold on the taxi industry, that they are, whilst we of course welcome all these initiatives, they are a very powerful lobby that have unfortunately literally gotten out of control in South Africa, and they have to be brought back into line and realize that they are operating in a constitutional democracy where the rule of law is important. The next issue I want to welcome, Chair, is the mentions of using technology to make the roads safer, and in terms of taxi operations. There is technology that exists, Chair, that is similar to a lift. And I'm a big guy. I know when I get in a lift, I always look at what the maximum weight is. But I don't know if you've ever had the experience of getting into a lift and where the maximum weight is exceeded, lift simply will not work. It just sounds an alarm and it will not work. Our taxis need to be the same. Most of the accidents caused, the mass accidents where there's mass death involving taxis, involves overloading. We have to have taxis that have got weight sensors on them that don't allow them to start if they are overloaded. And then also, the same lift example, if a lift starts free falling down a shaft for whatever reason, there are mechanisms built in that slow the lift down so that it doesn't plummet straight to the bottom and kill everybody inside. It's the same with taxis. We have to work on systems that actually govern the speed of taxis, that they cannot go above a certain speed threshold. And that is all available through technology. So I really welcome that. And then finally, Chair, on the issue of flying cars and flying taxis, well, Minister, I've got to say this to you. These taxis are flying already, boss. They're flying already. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Butler. Honourable members, that I will then move to Honourable May. Honourable Lund. There's an honourable member on the chat group. Honourable L. I thought it was Honourable Lund. He says, "Chair, note me when able." Can we then move to Honourable Sitole? Honourable Dango.
Very much, Chairperson. Just on the question of the cooperative bank, and maybe we should go wider and look at community banks in its totality, not only for transport, because then we can look at the risk very differently to what commercial banks look at, and maybe that's what we investigate, Minister. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Dango. I see Honourable May.
What is happening there?
Honourable May, can you admit yourself?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I would like to ask a question about the financing of taxi owners. During my oversight in the Eastern Cape, taxi operators explained to me that if you're blacklisted, the commercial banks don't want to help you. We all know it's true. But then they say they've got an alternative way for financing through a taxi industry. And then it's very expensive because the interest rate is 21%. The one guy showed me a receipt that is paying back 18,000 Rand per month. Is the taxi industry a financial institution as well? Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honourable May. Honourable Mabala. Honourable Ketababala. I see
How are you?
Ketamabara.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm good yourself.
Now, first of all, the IFP do welcome the initiative of professionalization of the taxi industry. But my concern, Chairperson, what I want to try to find out, because there was that national taxi team which was formed initially, what happened to them? Where did they fail? Why they didn't actually implement what have been started? If they can just give that background. And the other one, Chairperson, is that one of the subsidizing of taxes. I'm trying to check. The department is trying to subsidize the taxes, or they are subsidizing the commuters of the taxis industry, because there is that differentiated. If they can ask us, give us that information. And the other one, Chairperson, that I'm trying to find out on this one is that one, the buy-in of the taxi industry, because the failure and the success of this initiative is the processes and the program of making sure that the taxi industry, because they are a different association, they are being buy-in for this initiative. If there is that participation, and the other thing that if they can just give us some idea and clarity and understanding, the stakeholders, the involvement of stakeholders like unions and the representative of the people associations, all those, if they can be actually take them into board, so that whatever has been started, everybody must be involved. And the other one, Chairperson, that I'm trying to check is that the negotiations between the NTA and the Santaco, have they started that one? Because you see, there is a different ideas between the Santaco and NTA. If that one can be actually initiated, so that when we move forward, everybody is involved. I think the most of them, Chairperson, will check when the presentation has been unfolded. But thank you very much for the department and the minister for this initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Sitole. Honorable Boshoff.
Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm covered.
Thank you, Honorable Boshoff. Honorable Minister, there's on the chat note the questions posed by Honorable Matebula. I will ask Tupeka just to read those questions from Honorable Matebula.
Thank you, Chairperson. The first question reads as follows. What effort does your department put in place in promoting gender equality in transport system, as it is still dominated by males? Number two, what role are they playing to empower those female who are already in the industry and face discrimination? Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Honorable Marakhani. Honorable Ramadwa. Honorable members, it looks like we have exhausted the...
No, Chairperson.
Okay. Yes.
Yes, I think you might have missed me. My name is Tami Mapena, a member of the portfolio committee.
I did ask raise your name. Probably you were still you couldn't hear me. Over to you, Honorable Mabena.
No, thank you so much. I think I'll be just brief. So, look, I think as Honorable Chris has already said, from the DSI, we welcome the initiative, and we believe that if it's done correctly, it will definitely be one of those milestones which over the past 2 decades would have been one of those initiatives which changed the landscape in terms of transport in the country. But just perhaps once the document is shared, maybe some of the questions which I have would have been addressed. Also, maybe if I can just be afforded the opportunity just to ask them. Anyway, one, the delegation split between NTA and Santaco at the national conference. Sorry, at the national Indaba. How would it be like in terms of delegation? How many delegates will NTA have, and how many delegates will Santaco have? And also, at the provincial Indaba, does the NTA and Santaco organize separate Indabas, or will they be consolidated in a process will be run by the department where all of them needs to come in one room, and then it's a consolidated National Department of Transport provincial Indaba, and then they come in as stakeholders. And then also for the, if we can be given timelines for the provincial Indabas. I know you have given us some sort of a bird's eye view of the process, but if you can give us the timelines for the provincial Indabas, I know that on the 6th of August, or a date, as the minister has already said, that depending on the preparedness, is the launch. And I understand that in terms of the process flow, the high-level summary document is already been completed, and I believe that it will be shared with members. And also, the format of the provincial Indabas, will this take the format of hearings? If yes, how many per province will this entail? For instance, if you say maybe you're going to come to, for argument's sake, to Gauteng, how many legs of Gauteng are you going to have? Or are you going to have one leg? And then also, if the envisaged outcome as per which speaks to the consolidation of at least NTA and Santaco, how will the process be managed to avoid a repeat of a clean sweep of leadership positions by either NTA and or Santaco? I think if the process can also, I think many members have touched on this, on the issues of operating licenses. It is indeed, it will be good and great, and a breakthrough, I believe, in the taxi industry, because many operators are operating with receipts, and I think that needs to be looked at. And also, the provincial authorities which needs to issue operating licenses within a specified time frame as per the guidelines. When they are not doing so, can't we have a process where national comes and intervenes and then takes over that process? Or can we have a centralized process where everyone can apply at national? I'm not sure if that is at all if that can work or not. And then also, can obviously some of the submissions will be coming from the public. I'm also allowed to make submissions, but also maybe just for good measure. Can the department perhaps try to benchmark with Santaco's widows program within the Department of Transport, and maybe in a process that will culminate in the widows program run by Santaco being or becoming a sub program of the Department of Transport? I think there was a presentation which was done by the DG in one of the committees, and I think you identified the problem very well. That you have a widow, there was an operating license, it was not converted, there was no change of ownership. Now the taxi operator dies, there's a widow left behind, and it's all just a mess. That program is currently being run by Santaco, but obviously Santaco would have to ultimately go to the Department of Transport. If maybe as part of the overall document, if this can also be maybe done in such a way that it becomes a sub-program of the department. And then also, I would also agree with the assertion, I think it was made by Ushikazu Venkile, to say creating a statutory body will stifle the industry. I think the objective currently is that you need to have an industry which is one, organized, but also an industry which can also be receptive to the process of it being professionalized. But you don't want a situation where they're stifled. You need them to have a full voice of presenting or of representing the member associations the way they want. But if we are indeed going to create a statutory program, they will, I think, there would come a time where they are almost absorbed into the state or into the Department of Transport, because now they are sort of a statutory body which is there. So I think also the example of GGTA registering themselves to being a company, I think perhaps maybe in the document, or maybe one can also look at the submissions to say share ownership. Many taxi ranks are either owned by the metros and they're maintained by the metros, and anything else that needs to be done. Well, I'm speaking exclusively to the metros, where taxi ranks can have some sort of responsibility towards that facility, where in terms of maintenance, they also come and play their role. So I think those are my contributions. Thank you so much, Jefferson.
Thank you, Honorable Mabena. Minister, I think from my side, I'm more impressed by the articulation in terms of how the current challenges within the taxi industry is problematized and also raised in the problem statement, but also the evolution of the challenges that is engulfing the taxi industry, and the commitment of the part of the department to resolve the impasse. Critical also to me is the assertion that the document makes around an observation on the informal way in which the sector operates, and the commitment to remedy the situation, which I believe that is quite critical, particularly given the commitment that the department has made with the mitigation around the COVID-19, the 1.3 billion on the table to sort of mitigate the challenges that the taxi industry is facing, but also the formalization thereof, particularly around converting the business into corporate entities, but also to ensure that it is compliance with the tax laws, and also the labor laws of the country, which obviously will come to the rescue of ordinary taxi drivers or employees in the sector. What is also critical is also the commitment moving forward in terms of ensuring that not only do we focus in the metros and also the secondary cities, but also the commitment to deal with to also bring transformation to the rural part of the industry, which must be appreciated. Before I hand over to the minister, let me just check as to whether my co-chair has the last word before I give over to the to the team to respond. Honorable Zwani.
No, thanks, Chair. Indeed, let me thank the opportunity given to me by the Chair. I remember some times ago, the minister appeared on TV using the words "andizi," "akekli." Now, I want to appreciate the fact that we can proudly say the minister is ready now, and the minister uyatla. Andazi ukuthi nizothini ngesiXhosa. Ndiyeza ngoku. I want to appreciate the breadth and length of the presentation, the knowledge deposited in this presentation, and all the officials who presented. I actually want to say at some point when I made my first speech, I indicated that I have confidence in the capacity that the minister has, knowing him. And this is one example that the minister has started to deal and mop up in his own words with what is happening in the department. I just want to deposit also my appreciation of the initiative and say to the minister, I'm sure we'll see the same as we have already seen that he has started with PRASA and other entities will follow. Otherwise, good luck, Minister and your team, to the Indaba that you are going to be holding. We are holding our breath and awaiting good news that will lead to the formalization of this taxi industry, not only for the commuters, but also for the industry itself. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Co-Chair. Minister.
Thank you very much, Chair. I preferred that the DG and the Vengile come first with due respect, and then I come last.
No problem with that, Minister.
Okay.
DG.
Thanks, Chair. I think the DG will deal with the bulk of the issues. But I think the important thing to highlight, considering that all these issues that we have flagged in each of the areas are going to constitute a discussion. So there are no firm positions on the issues. There was a question in relation to ranks. One of the critical issues in relation to ranks is also in relation to how do we create a mechanism where the approach to the ownership and control of ranking facilities is standardized. Of course, this is going to be part of that conversation with the industry. There was also a question about the operating licenses, the provinces. I think I made this point, but I think the member might have missed it. That in terms of the law of the NLTA, if a provincial regulatory entity is unable to issue operating licenses within the given time frames, the National Public Transport Regulator is mandated by law to step in and assist in that process. That is why the Minister has operations and the NPTR. I think the detail of the issues, I think the DG would be able to respond to the rest of the questions, Chair. Maybe the last question is the NTTT. I think just to clarify that the National Taxi Task Team was established by Minister Mek Maharaj in 1995. The entire framework of what we are doing today relating to the taxi industry was grounded on that. So there was implementation of a number of those recommendations that were accepted by government. They found themselves into the legislation. I think what we're dealing with now are the challenges that arises out of that implementation and the weaknesses as a result of the experiences over time. DG, I think DG can deal with the rest.
Thanks, DG.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. On the other issues that have been raised, we wish to clarify that the issue of the tax recap has never been intended from word go, and even when you read the initial concept document pertaining to that, it never intended to be a permanent feature. And Honorable Khaye has raised this matter, and indeed it was an intervention. Over time, it had to be revised twice, and we are now in the third generation of the type of tax recapitalization we're doing. But you may recall that even in terms of the 1996 recommendations, the intent was to have a vehicle that is designed, purpose-made for safety standards, every other thing, things that Honorable Brataseth is raising today are things that were envisaged back then. But due to challenges with acceptability and of the industry to that point, that thing was abandoned along the way. We think it was a mistake that was abandoned, and we were looking in terms of the conversation to look at that, to bring the safety measures into being. Shortcuts were taken by manufacturers who said, no, look, we will take some of these features and incorporate them into the existing vehicles. But obviously, there are limitations. The things that Honorable Brataseth puts forth that should be considered in there, you would recall, these were originally intended to be part of all of this. Only things that were managed to be put in, some vehicles are fitted with a maximum speed limitation of 100, but you don't find it right across. And you also find illegal operations of cars that are second-hand. In any case, the law now prohibits a second-hand car from Kumbi being imported into South Africa and being utilized as a taxi, but we do know that such do come. They come, some of them to apparently to be scrapped, and they are released into the Republic, but somehow they find their way out of scrapyards into really roads, and they are operating. And we also have limitations, as Mr. Vengile points out. The initial idea was an intention to have the operating license, and with the operating license for the operator to be recognized. But now, some of the limitations are that the operating licenses are not necessarily linked to vehicles. So a person may well have started when they applied for a license, they gave the details of the vehicle, and they had a certificate that the vehicle was correct, but with the length of time of the operating license being 7 years, as Mr. Vengile has highlighted the challenges related thereto, you now have a challenge of a car that is long distance, has already done more than 400,000 kilometers on the clock. It's almost finished, this vehicle, and it's just 4 years into the license. And they then go buy a second-hand vehicle and continue to operate with a driver's license or with an operating license with a second-hand vehicle. So all of those limitations are some of the things we want to curtail now and ensure that we can do the linkages. And as part of the professionalization, Mr. Vengile spoke about the different models of ownership we're looking at, and that's what we need to explore. We have our own preferred models depending on what we see and on what the industry looks like, and we will ventilate also the preferred government theme, but we'll also listen to industry as such. But we need to ultimately agree on a time frame, including the phase out of the current vehicles, but towards a new future where we will have a single common vehicle that the IP is owned by the state and may be produced by local manufacturers on behalf of the state. And we draw heavy lessons from the London transport model and how they phased out the yellow taxis in London, and they managed to register everybody and brought in the current black vehicles you see, which are owned by the London Transport Authority. So we will draw heavy emphasis on that. Will we want these people after formalization to pay tax? Certainly, I think that's one of the key objectives of regularization. And once we do that and we formalize, professional standards will follow. Mr. Vengile spoke about potential of a code of conduct and all of that. All of that will be in, but subsidization goes with formalization, and therefore formalization means that formal industry, and if you do meet the tax thresholds, you ought to be paying tax, and I think that is where we are driving the matter towards. So there will be a win-win, a benefit to the state, to the fiscals, but also to the operators themselves operating in an environment which is subsidized. There's been an issue by Honorable May around the issue of whether indeed there is a financing agency in the taxi industry. Certainly there is. It's called the SA Taxi Finance. And that SA Taxi Finance is a division of SA Taxi and Transaction Capital. And they have raised money in the global markets, and they are buying vehicles in en masse and then selling them to people who are redlined by banks. And Santaco itself, through SA Taxi Choice, is a stakeholder in there, owning 25% of SA Taxi Finance, and that's what happens in it. So one of the things Mr. Vengile said are topics for discussion, particularly around empowerment, speaks to the issues of financing and all of that. Minister has been engaged also with banks, and banks will also be part of the invitation to the platform and to the Indaba, because if you look at this scenario, the banks don't invest a lot. The Nedbank Motor Vehicle Finance, MFC, you have Standard Bank Vehicle Asset Finance, VEF, and you have West Bank, and you also have the former Bank Fin in ABSA Vehicle Asset Finance. All of those people combined, the major banks, constitute only about 37% of the market share. The rest is carried by SA Taxi Finance alone. So, well, of course, with a small percentage of those who self-finance vehicles, but the bulk of the lion's share of the industry is financed by SA Taxi Finance. We ourselves were the first ones to raise our concerns with SA Taxi Finance about the exorbitant interest rates that are being charged and so on. But you may know that the weakness in this regard is that those thresholds of the things are what is allowed in the National Credit Act, and that is the disempowering issue. So the Credit Act allows for this marginalized people to be charged this exorbitantly, and these people are exploiting that loophole within the law, and that's exactly what we are seeing. But we need to look at a new financing model. Part of this is the role development financing institutions of government, including CIFA, the Small Enterprise Finance Agency. If they don't have a problem with financing trucks for delivery, and they do not have problem in financing buggies for courier services, they certainly shouldn't have difficulty in financing taxis. And I think it is a matter that we need to look into with Department of Small Business. There's been discussions when we were looking at the Taxi Relief Support Fund, and we have discussed with them about formalization of the taxi industry, and they are quite keen. We will need to move further to look at the development financing models around this, and one way of subsidization is not necessarily always to transfer money to the operator, but one way of operation of subsidization may be through this. A cheaper soft loan for which you can actually pay lesser. It's a form of subsidy by the state. And the other one speaks to vehicle manufacturing. If we own the copyright and we give manufacturers a subsidy in advance, if a vehicle was to be produced for 800,000 and the subsidy is already 200,000 given to the manufacturer, the operator buys it for 600, then the repayments are quite lower and the financing is cheaper. The subsidy is direct in ensuring that the prices can be kept lower. Will we be at the mercy of the operators, once we have subsidized them, to keep the prices and to benefit the commuter. Certainly, that's the work of the NPTR, and Mr. Vengile has put forth as part of the discussion documents what the NPTR seeks to do, and the National Public Transport Regulator must do his job. It should be an NERSA of public transport. Currently, now the operators in SCon goes towards NERSA, puts a motivation and a tariff why tariffs must be what they are, and NERSA looks at those tariffs, considers them, and then finally makes a determination about this. The law had originally intended this to be the case. And if you read it carefully, it says that that's what the NPTR ought to be. But we know the NPTR has not really done this. It never had the capacity to be able to do what NERSA does and to be able to do its own independent studies and market-related studies to determine what are the prices that must be paid in the economy like South Africa and what needs to be done. So NPTR will be capacitated to be able to do that and play its role in a proper way going forward, and therefore will not be at the mercy of this. And which brings me to what Honorable Katamabala Stola has raised, whether we are subsidizing really the operator or the commuter. Our intent really all the time is to subsidize the commuter. But it is not possible to stand on the side of the bus stop and give each and every commuter who's about to board a bus and say, here's your 50 cents, add it to what you are going to pay in the fare, and do not. In practice, we do not do it that way. We actually go to the licensed operators, give them something or some subsidy or some form of a grant, as is the case with buses now. We give the operators in buses a grant, and they have to, calculate on the formula per kilometer and per passenger journey, and we look at how many passengers they carry. They need to also prove to us that indeed they are carrying those passengers. It has not been an easy science. Many municipalities as well as many provinces are struggling to give us the proper reports to account for the subsidies that they are giving, because it's not possible to inspect and all the time be on a bus to check how many people have been on there. So often averages and the formulas we apply, even the stalling kilometers and everything, we have to look at those to make a determination how much we must pay as a subsidy. But once you do that, you're anticipating that the prices must be kept lower because you have put and subsidized some input cost, and therefore the operator must not pass on the additional cost onto the consumer or the commuter, but they keep their prices lower so that the commuter can find the buses cheaper. So we need to go beyond simply the formulas, and that we need to go to where enforcement of prices and the determination of what tariffs need to be paid. So commuters are no longer at the mercy of a taxi association that comes and makes a 360% increase in a price and just say, from now we'll charge 40 rand on this journey between Alexandra and Johannesburg. It can't be. So we have to give the state entities that must have the necessary independence and necessary powers to bite to be able to do exactly that in defense of consumers. The last thing that has been raised, most of the matters that Honorable Mabena are raising are matters that as part of the steering committee and with the consultation with provinces are still happening. And the steering committee has been expanded now to meet on a weekly basis as we get closer and closer to the process. And provinces will give their inputs because the situation of ownership and membership patterns are not the same across provinces. And therefore, the determination of who comes to the national Indaba and how and representing who is not a problem. Will we have the same Indaba? Certainly, it has to be one. We know that in Gauteng, they had previously, last year, had a national taxi Indaba. And in that national taxi Indaba, both Santaco and NTA participated in the same Indaba. There was no two Indabas for Santaco and one for the NTA. And I think our planning process is also looking at that. It means all stakeholders, including forums that represent meter taxis and forums that represent other role players within the sector, including business operations, value chain stakeholders, as well as financiers and commuters and the members of the public, including stakeholders within NEDLAC will also participate at the Indaba. So all of that is being determined to be as such. And I think as we get closer and as we invite also members of the two committees in Parliament to come to the Indaba. We will certainly give more information as well as further briefings about what the final determinations are. I believe I've covered all other questions, Chair. Thank you.
Let me just be brief. Thank you. Just to clarify the issue that has been raised about attendance and so on, I think we have sought to recognize the fact that there are challenges in this industry and why and what needs to be done to get the industry somewhere. And in our examination of all these challenges, we have come across that formalization is key, subsidy by government for the taxi industry is key, and the professionalization of the industry is key, regulating the industry is key. Now, will government achieve all of these things without a buy-in of the taxi industry? No, it can't. We want a buy-in of the taxi Indaba, and the taxi Indaba must evolve out of a pyramid scheme, in which we start from the base upwards to basically address the issues and the challenges that we are facing. And the national Indaba must consolidate a consensus. So it's going to be a hard discussion. Even what we're presenting before the committees now, it will be challenged. There is no agreement. We lay issues bare and we get into different committees to negotiate and discuss with all the structures. We are in that unfortunate situation of NTA and breaking away. We will have to engage with that process. And as a minister, over and above everything else, I am also engaging with that. And that is what is important for me, to seek a resolution of that, because we can't walk away from the negotiated unity arrangement that we had for the taxi industry unless we go in for a recipe for disaster on these particular matters. Vengile have characterized the origins of the NTTT process and what it has actually produced. In our view, that still stands. If there's got to be a review of any of such, the Indaba will pronounce on it. But we don't want to go back to a fragmented, approach where you've had SAPTA, you have had SALDATA, you've got everything else around us. The Santaco process and the Santaco, what became the outcome of the NTTT was a process that everybody allowed, and it helped us to engage with the taxi industry. That is why Santaco is housed at the Transport Department and is being supported for its operation with 25 million per annum income, by the department out of those agreements. I've inherited that, and it is a process that came out of this process of negotiation. So if I've got to recognize other structures, there's got to be, fundamental, reasons why there is such, and how do we navigate the process to come to the center. So we want districts, provinces to come up and pronounce and consolidate in the steering committee. And long before we arrive at the Indaba, we should have processed this thing. Now, the department, in terms of its work, it has got its work cut out in the cycle of planning, financial planning in government, to ensure that we incorporate what could be the outcome of the Indaba and its implication for the future. Because in April next year, we want to be in a position to implement a process of formalization of the industry. So it's very important for us. You can see now the defects of non-formalization in the COVID-19 situation. We didn't plan for COVID-19, but inadvertently, the taxi industry have been hard hit because of non-formalization. They did not qualify for certain schemes in the country to gain access to finance. And at the same time, we need to look at the funding model for the industry. Is it working? And it does not mean we are throwing out of the window the model that exists today of SA Taxi Finance. No, it is working, and the industry itself is part of that particular model. So we are not, from our side, throwing that out of the window. What government wants is equity for everybody, to ensure that we are able to meet halfway the commuter to access the taxi industry. But the taxi industry itself, in terms of being accessed by the commuter, must be cheaper, and then it must be professional. And the commuter must actually be happy. The owner must raise profits out of the industry and be able to sustain their own financial situation, and even pay for the workers who are looking after the taxi and so on. And they must do that without a fear that we are unable to meet our financial obligations because of the sharks, the big banks. We owe them, and we've got to pay them, and we've got to do extraordinary things, including killing people, to fight for routes and win those routes, because we've got to service the debt and all of that. So it is important for us to do this. And I'm quite sure at the end we'll not win all things on the table that we put across, but we need some consensus to enable us to start up the process of formalization in the country for the taxi industry. And that is very important for us and government and the taxi industry going forward. So it's going to be a very important process, and that is why we have come to you, because here there are political parties in parliament, and we appreciate this platform to brief you first, amongst others. We will go from here to NETLEC, and then from there we will engage, with interested parties to brief them, even before we open the dialogue and the platform, because this shouldn't just be a talk show like all the Indabas. It should be a process of shaping the policy framework for the industry going forward. So, Chair, with those few words, thank you very much, and thank you for the platform you have given to us to take up the taxi matters forward. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Minister, for the comprehensive response to the engagement that was made by honorable members. I think the point that was raised by Honorable MacDonald, we hope that the minister will be able to assist him so that he can be able to respond to the issues that were presented to him. At the beginning of the meeting, honorable members, we did highlight the context within which the brief was raised. We indicated that the brief was to ensure that the two committees are on par in terms of the development as it pertains to the taxi Indaba. And right at the beginning, the origin was raised of where this matter comes from. The public discourse platform as the convergence around which the matter will be raised was also canvassed. The objective was raised. The discussion documents which will form the basis for the discussion and also at the center of the content of the public discourse was raised. I think what was key from the presentation is the formalization of the taxi industry. Key issues around empowerment was raised. The code of the conduct within the industry, particularly to ensure also that there is a semblance of unity was raised. The issue around the regulation, the operating license, the law enforcement as a challenge was raised. But more than that, the empowerment being at the center of the reimagine taxi industry, the rationale behind the recap, but more than that, various stages that were outlined in terms of the roadmap, was canvassed with the committees, and future beyond the Indaba was then advanced by the DG. And I think we're at a point where, as a committee, we can say that we really embrace and appreciate the work in progress that was tabled before the committees, and we are looking forward to the continued engagement, appreciating the fact that as the two committees we are one of the stakeholders, and the consultation continues to unravel, and that continues as a basis to ensure that by the time taxi Indaba is convened, there is a semblance of convergence and a semblance of unity around the rationale behind the transformation of the taxi industry. With those few words, honorable members, let me then take this opportunity to express our gratitude. Honorable MacDonald?
Sorry, Chair, just give me an opportunity before you close, please, Chair.
Beautiful, beautiful. There you are. The floor is yours.
Chair, unfortunately, I'm sorry I have to disturb you, Chair. We have to make a decision if we want to have these for planning purposes, that secretaries can schedule a meeting with those people that are developing that battery cars. So, Chair, as a committee, or can we just make a decision that we should call them, and then the committee secretary then will find a space for them? Can we just make that decision, Chair, that we have it on the decision, please, Chair?
Decision is taken around that, but at the same time, I was saying that we need also to ensure that the ministry, because they will be at the center of ensuring that we are in a much more better position to advance the program. That's why I said we are relying on the minister for guidance on this matter. With those few words, by co-chair, last word, and then we close. You can unmute yourself, Chair.
I remain under your guidance, Chair. You can close. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Honourable members, with those few words, the meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Long live the Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Have a good weekend.
Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. Same to everybody.
Thanks.
Good night. Hey, nice weekend.
Leg a slap.
Jambas. Bye-bye, Jambas.
and then go to more, show background effect. Where's background effects? Hey, preview. Guys, bonus background effects. Where is the background here? Where is the background? Background. Hey, this thing. Sure. Yazi ufuna ngene ngantoni mhlawumbe?
Hallo Andile, hallo Martin.
Hallo. Jy weer gesien die mense het nou weer gelief. Nou is hy weer skielik nou hallo aan hulle Martiens. What's it mean jou?
Yes.
Doen nie kom by.
Yes, of course.
Huh?
That's the story, yeah.
Oh, there's Honorable Caesar, I must disappear now. I'm undercover.
Andrew.
Hello, Caesar. How are you doing, sir?
Very well, thank you. Still fixing my background here.
Okay.
Unjani? Ngiyaphila.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Cesar?
Leadership, I'm here. I'm back. So there's a light here, isn't it? Ooh.
Did you speak to the TG? Eh? Khuluma, vula.
Angikwazanga leadership ngifonile ngimthola.
Yeah, umsendele WhatsApp ngimbriefile.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Ubese committee ngesikhathi ngimbriefa though.
Oh yeah, no, maybe isizathu eso sokuthi angabambi phone.
Yeah, umsendele WhatsApp noma i-message but ngimbriefile.
Okay. Hayi siyabo.
Shap.
Bomsa. Hayi man le light yakho.